My name is Rummel. I'm 82 years old and lived in Frankenmuth all my lifetime. My grandfather, John Rummel, came from Germany in 1852. He showed early interest in the progress of Frankenmuth. Besides being a farmer and a carpenter, he served as Justice of the Peace and for many years was school inspector for the public school system. In 1883, he was elected to the state legislature, the only man in Frankenmuth ever to reach this distinction. In 1895, which was the 50th anniversary of Frankenmuth, he wrote a book on the history of Frankenmuth in the German language. This I have translated into the English language in 1990. With the approach of 1995, which is the 150th anniversary of Frankenmuth, I decided to make a slight record of all buildings in the city of Frankenmuth, old and new. The title of my presentation is Frankenmuth as I Remember It by Rummel. Frankenmuth as I remember it. This is the northernmost building on the west side of the main street where this program starts. This is the new Ford dealer building. After 3 generations of serving Frankenmuth, Ford decided to move west of town or north of town and do their business on Main Street. This is Burger King, which has just recently moved into Frankenmuth. This is McDonald's. They have several times improved their building since they've been in Frankenmuth, but this is their latest. This is the Wolverine Bank building, which has been in Frankenmuth for several years. This is the Weiss farm machinery, which was started by Ray Weiss's father, Ferdinand, and it is owned by Gilbert and Ray and Ferd. This is a former residence of a Mr. Lazo, which was bought by the Rausch real estate, where they now conduct their business. This is a similar house which stands next door to the Lazo house, was also owned by a Lazo, and now it is was bought by Rausch, and it's called Little Caesar's Pizza. This is Salinger Beverage, which of late has been sold to Young Garage as additional space for them. This is the original Mike Young building, and the one they bought from Zeilinger matched this in architecture. This is the Universal Engineering Company, which has been in Frankenmuth for many, many years. He was originally started by W.R. Fisher, but towards the later years was managed by Jim Wixon. This is the corner of Main and Tennessee, and it was called the Acme Oil Company. It was one of their oldest gas stations in town, and it was owned by Bill Trinkline. And you wander in the foreground, the little pot of flowers that sits on something. Those were really cisterns for the fire department, and which they had in various towns to draw water from because we didn't have city water. And it had the old pumps, hand pumps, where you fill the cylinder with gas and just let it run by gravity into the car. This is the corner of Main and Tennessee, now owned by the Ulster Complex before they moved to the northern part of town. They had a store in there, and also their gas station. And now it has a Dunkin' Donuts, it has 7-Eleven, and it also has a takeout food store incorporated with it. Now this is an old picture taken from Main Street looking south, and the corner building on the right side is the old interurban station, and next to it was Leslie Hardware, at that time known as Fechter Hardware, and the next building was the original Ford garage. And if you look a little bit beyond that, is a little white porch that hangs out there that you can see. That's the Richard Trinkline residence. In this program, I did not include any empty residences. I used only business buildings. Now, in this corner building where there was what we call the interurban building, was also a restaurant. It was run by Hess, Joe Hess and his wife, and they had 3 daughters, and they served. This was a restaurant, and if you need to buy a ticket to go to Saginaw or Flint, you bought it in this place, and this was also the waiting room. This is to show you that once upon a time we did have a streetcar. Mr. Sherman is the conductor, and he lived in Frankenmuth, and he ran the interurban between here and Saginaw. He had a regular time schedule, especially for the people who had to be in school at 8 o'clock in the morning in Saginaw, and they came home again by 5 o'clock at night by interurban. Now here's a picture of a railroad track. It looks sort of empty, but you can tell it is taken on Franklin Street, looking straight east. and you notice the big ditches on the left side, which is Genesee Street, and a little footpath in the middle of the railroad track, and to the right would be the councilman residence, and on the corner that you can see down the corner is the interurban restaurant. Now, this was this had a little different system. It had a freight engine which pulled in box cars, and they went east past Main Street, and then by Humanus Street made a curve and went down Haas Street and came back again to the back of the Star of the West, where they unloaded coal and where the Star of the West loaded their flour that was mailed to that was sent to Chicago. There was an incident here in the spring of the year when things got kind of muddy, and in back of the Star of the West they were unloading coal from a coal pit and a car, and for some reason or other their car loader touched the electrical wire on top, and a young man got killed. This is the Union Station Union Cheese House on Maple Road, and they loaded cheese into the cars that was shipped to Detroit. Now here's that same sports tavern that I showed you before, which used to be the interurban station. That was rebuilt by Armin Zucker. He was quite a progressive man. I mean, this was in dry times, and the right side of the building was a pool room. I think they had around 12 pool tables in there, and the left side was a beautiful, beautiful decorated ice cream center where the young people could gather and buy ice cream and hamburger and stuff like that. In between that building and the Fechter building, every Friday night he showed movies, continued movies. They had themselves a wagon with a projector and screen, and people came by the hundreds and brought their own chairs and blankets and sat on the ground and watched movies. This is now the tavern as it looks today. Modeled, and the interior is much the same, but there's living quarters upstairs, and it's called the Sportsman's Bar. This is Michel Hardware, formerly known as Fechter Hardware, which was his father-in-law. The original building is the tall building, and then the side building built to the south was an addition put on, which was once upon a time owned by or rented by the Frankenmuth Insurance Company. Also, there used to be an IGA store in that building. This is a standard gas station. Herman and Al Heroff ran this station, but I think it was owned by Bill Conzelman. And if you would notice that gas was dispensed on the sidewalk. It seems to me that a gas station had the privilege of having an undercover which was inside, and then the outside part was roadbed or sidewalk, and the cars could stop there and get the filled just like on the inside. This is the original Ford garage, which was built by Fred Yalster before he built the one on Genesee Street. And later on, it became a hatchery, Amstutz Hatchery, and in later years, it was used by Leslie as an appliance center. Now this is a sort of unusual picture. The building to the left was Nicholson Electric. Fred Nicholson operated this building, and the building to the right of that was called the Frankenmuth Granite Cast Stone Works. It made cement blocks, and Otto Fechter and Art Mosner owned this place. And in the place that I told you before where Richard Trinkline's house stood, this would be the location. It's called the Midtown Shops, and Tom Fechter is the owner of the Midtown Shops, but formerly it was the Richard Trinkline residence. Now, I am a firm believer in historic markers, which Frank Muth had many years ago when Mr. E.F. Ridmiller insisted, while he was on the board of the Historical Association, that all the important businesses should have a marker. And this happens to be one of them, one of the few that are remaining. This is the Frankenmuth Cheese Company, 1846, 1847. It gives you some idea immediately where the location is, and also gives you the time when it was in operation. And this is the cheese house that was in back of the marker, and it was operated on the corner of School Street and Main Street, and John Shawhouse was the manager there, and his cheesemaker was Bud Hopke. Now, this building got remodeled. You can see the marker out in front. It got remodeled to the north, and the old factory was torn down, and this building was rather new, and they kept that. It was later converted with a new front on the School Street side, and was rented by First of Michigan. This is First of America Bank On that corner there used to be Mrs. Beisnigger's house, very popular lady, and next to that was the C.F. Link house and the Fred Google house, all on this corner property. All three buildings stood side by side. Now here's, after the Google residence came these two buildings here. That's the Link Hardware on the left side. Later on became Walt Salinger's hardware store, and the Googles converted their portion into a furniture store. Of Link Hardware stood this building, which was our post office. This house stands where the List family home used to be. Emil List was born there, and had a sister Elma, had a hat store in it, and it was quite a nice piece of property, and they tore that down and put up the post office. Now here's the Baning Jewelry Store and Clock Shop. One of the nicer things in town from a standpoint of staying with the Bavarian type architecture. Now, to the south of that was this general store that was many, many years old. That was founded by a Mr. List. Later on it became the Ordner Company, and after the Ordner Company it became Frankenmuth News. And this is also the List property, same Mr. List, and that was a bar, and the man is standing out in front, the tall man with that cap on, that was Mr. Humanus. You can find him on many pictures. And once upon a time it was used as a theater, and then Walter Google rented it or bought it, and he had a clothing store in there. Now here's the Black Horse restaurant, which will be replaced probably by the new motel that's going up in that area. Now here's Cedar Drugstore. Used to be the former IGA store, and on that location was a Mrs. Rao. Right, had a nice, you can see the house on the left-hand side, that Rao house, and that had a big garden that extended quite far to the left. But you will see new things happening in this drugstore here too by 1995. Now this is one of the older buildings in town. It was called the Armin Zucker Barber Shop. You saw it in the Frankfurt News yesterday. That's where Ed Denzer got his start. This also had the telephone exchange in it, and Agnesrao, I think, was the operator. And in the back part of the building was a young fella, not so young, but his name was Wershing. He was a bicycle repairman. And later on, Armin Zucker married Agnesrao, and then they moved to a different location. Now, this was a quick fix here. That house that used to be next to the Cedar drugstore decided to put a front porch on and changed its complete looks. And is now owned by Keith Basnicker. This is Willis Sausage House. It formerly was known as the Ruprecht Sausage. Nearly all the Ruprecht family lived off of this sausage house. Now this is rather unique in that in my young days it was a blacksmith shop. It had big doors in front, and I used to enjoy walking in there and watching shoe horses or make things from iron. And of course I can sort of smell the odor of the inside of that building. This is another unusual building in that there used to be a Frankenmuth State Bank and the Frankenmuth German American Bank. And this was the German American Bank which housed its quarters in the Hattie Hubinger store on the northwest corner. And sometimes after the First World War, they decided to build their own building, which was located between the Blacksmith Shop and the Ordinary Company, or at that time known as the List Hotel. And that vacant lot I can remember being sort of a park. There were lots of trees in there, but it was empty and it was not kept clean. But they decided to put this building in that lot. Now here we have the three buildings together now. The end building is the List Hotel, and then the bank building in the middle, and then the IGA store on this end here. So that used to be a blacksmith shop and an empty building, and then came the Nagely Hotel. We really do not have the exact time when Alex List built that building, but it was the 6th hotel in Frankenmuth when that one was built. And now we have this one picture in front of the Alex List Hotel when it was under the management of John Nagely. And you find children standing in front with those ladies, and that would be Toots Nagely and his brother John. These two little kids there would be their children. It was they later on sold it to the Ordinary Company, and John went back on the farm. Now you have here a complete renovation of that hotel. The hotel is inside this building. It has been remodeled, and Oscar Rao did an excellent job, fitted in with his other buildings down the street, and it's a big addition to the city of Frankenmuth. Here's a building that I regret that it was ever tore down. This was on the corner of Tuscola and Maine. It was the original Geyer residence and saloon. You see where the porch runs back there, that's the house part of it. And with John Geyer, I think, had somewhat like 8 or 10 children, and the entire upstairs was used for bedrooms. And then they had a big dining room, but it was prohibition, and from a standpoint of being a bar, an active bar, to my knowledge, it never was. And for some reason or other, somebody came along after World War II and bought it with the idea of putting up a gas station, and after the building was down, that gas station was denied and the building was gone. Now we have a series of buildings here, which was the Rao store, Nicholson supply, and once upon a time on the south end it had a harness shop, and once upon a time in the middle it had a barber shop in addition to what is here now. I think once there were 2 buildings, and they were separated, they were close within a few feet of each other, and they burned down. And then they rebuilt themselves this building here. Now this is in the place of Rao's store. And the next building is a part of Michel Hardware, and there's another building in between, a modern building. This is the same picture, only it's taken from the south, shooting north. It shows those 3 sort of buildings put together there, which replaced Nicholson Hardware and Rao Brothers. This is the first building of the Frankenmuth Mutual Insurance Company. It belonged to Carl Nicholson, and once upon a time, Carl was also the local undertaker, but there was no funeral home. All bodies were taken care of in homes. So it was not necessary to have a funeral home, but Carl kept all his caskets in the basement of this building here, while the top part was used by the insurance company. Now this was Carl Nicholson's residence, which stood next door to his home, to his business, and was bought by Emil Rummel and tore down for his Rummel Agency building, which is there now. This is the Rummel Agency building that replaced the house you just saw. Now there's a few buildings in between this house and the Nicholson house. There was a Kiefner home, Schmidt home, and Pastor Gerber's home, and then came this Franz Ranke's house, which became a gift shop after a while. And this building is one of the older buildings, older brick buildings in Frankenmuth. The art gallery was put next to it. It's almost on the street, but it hides the house in back, and we lost some of the niceness of that residence in back of the gallery. Now, as you go down the street, you find another historic marker. That, to me, tells the whole story of sort of Frankenmuth businesses of years gone by. And it was McClellan bought the building from Abraham, and he had the sign on the building for a long time, and now he remodeled again, and in the meantime the historic marker disappeared. Now you see it says Frankenmuth Cider and Jelly Works, which means that the woolen mill was not in existence at that time. The woolen mill came later, which was bought by Franz Ranke and a man by the name of Gerber from, I think the original woolen mill was in Tuscola, and they brought it into this building to fit in with the cider and the jelly works, which was a seasonal business. But they did make some wonderful sour gel from cider and also some apple butter. Could not be beat. We kids ate it by the gallons. Here's a picture of the cider, of the woolen mill as it was in the early days. All kinds of construction going on, but in 1918 it had a war contract to make mittens and socks, and they employed I think close to 75 to 100 people making socks and mittens for the army. Here's the next phase of that same building. You see the old woolen mill in the background, but up front is now a store where they sold clothing, and the marker is still there, but also this corner became Barber Shop, and so it changed a little bit, and the cider and jelly works was sold to somebody else. Now, it's hardly believable that from the original woolen mill that they can produce a building as nice as this. McClellan did an excellent job of redoing the building and keeping nearly all the old machinery inside and in working order in such a manner so that people can see it as people are quilting and washing wool and carding wool, and all that can be seen right in this building now. This is the next building south. It's known as antique shop, antique auto. Recently sold and bought by McClellan, who also owns the woolen mill. This is the old Cider garage. Been there for many, many years, owned by Edmund and Elmer Zender. Auto repairs of all sorts, and I think they had Chevrolet and Buick sales. It was across the street from where I had my first studio. And I always remember when I first was married and something went wrong in the house, I needed tools, and I didn't have any, so I ran over to the garage, and they would lend me the tools that I needed to fix whatever had to be fixed. This went on for about a year or so, and one day when I got back to that bench where I always picked up the tools, there was a sign there that says, "The man who loans tools is out," which was enough hint for me to buy my own. But this building here was sold to Baker, Baker Sales, and Baker then opened up a car sales area up further north on Main Street onto the east side of the street, and this was sold for a terrific price by Baker, and now it contains about 10 shops of various kinds, gift shops and ice cream shops and candy shops and sweaters. It's beautifully done. This is the building as what used to be the Zender garage, and the front is beautifully done. It's ramped for handicapped people, and the north side of the building is the shade part, and it has benches all along, and they're filled with people, older people sitting there eating ice cream cones. This used to be known as the arcade now. That used to be the Getz Hotel residence. Getz Hotel was down the street a little bit, but Henry Getz built this house and lived there with his first wife. They didn't have any children, and he later on remarried again, married George Rummel on his second marriage. There is still a little resemblance to the house, but it's now called the arcade. This is the Nicholson home. We call it the Nicholson home in our days, but it was built by Dr. Hone. Dr. Hone was an MD who also owned the building next door, which is now the country store, not the country store, the village store. That's where he had his soda fountain and his office. But he built this house here, and he only had one son, to my knowledge, but he had marriage difficulty, and he divorced his wife, and his wife and the women moved on to Saginaw, and then it was sold to Walter Nicholson, who raised his whole family. Lossie and all those were raised in this house here. Now here's the village store, which probably has more history than any other place in Frankenmuth. In my days, it was known as the Caulfield drugstore. Now, Dr. Caulfield lived he lived upstairs. And downstairs was the soda bar, but to the left the wing to the left was the post office, the Frankenmuth post office. And that was run by Walter Kern, and a lot of you people remember Walter Kern. And Dr. Hone had his office in there besides that. Now this originally, as I remember at first, it didn't have that red building on the south side added to it. It was just a building known as the Getz Hotel. After Getz had it, he sold it to McNiven, Raleigh McNiven, and Henry Fisher and Mary Fisher bought it after that. And they put the addition on, and they had extra dining facilities for that then. Now here's a sort of an unusual picture of that Getz Hotel. It was a wedding, and it was welcome, and a photographer came and photographed it and left that picture. There were several people I could identify, but they were much older than I was. But Henry Getz was the hostess. Now this is the Honol House. Still today, and you can still see parts of it after it was remodeled by the Zenners. But Honol had 2 children, and Man himself worked for Huger in a slaughterhouse, and he was tough. He was a rough man, but he was kind at heart. And every day we saw him come from the slaughterhouse after he had worked all day, and his wife was a Huger. Now this is a building that's gone, that stood between the Thunder Bar and the Honol House. That driveway, that's where this building was. And it was the old Frankenmuth News. And the old man in the middle, that's Mr. Gallagher himself, and the man on the right is a young Gallagher, but not Bill. Bill is my father-in-law, but that's not him. Lived upstairs. There's a side steps going up on the side, and later on the building was tore down after it was bought by the Zenners, and it was moved back for a while. Somebody lived in it, and then it was used. The driveway was needed to get back into the parking lot. This is the original, what they known as the original Exchange Hotel. I always said the reason it was called Exchange Hotel because it exchanged hands so often. But it was originally the sign on there says Exchange Hotel, and that is the part of this building is still inside the Cedar Hotel. Now you see, that's the second addition to the New Exchange. It was now called the New Exchange. Also, was not owned by Zenners at that time. It was a different company. Hesses were in there, Tom Fisher was in there, Feltner was in there. They had endless owners. Now you will notice that in this next building where that shows the Center building, that the original roof is still there, and some of the windows are still showing, especially from the front. See that gable up there? That's the original gable. So in each hotel at Frankenmuth we have 6 of them. None of them ever burned down. And all of them have been rebuilt and are somewhere inside the building. All these original bars and hotels we had are still in Frankenmuth inside some other building. Now this is down the street from the hotel. It was known as the Albert Hetzner. Albert Hetzner had his Pontiac agency in that place. This building, a building before this here that stood there exploded one night, and a fire caused it to burn down, and then it was rebuilt with this building here. And of course, then when Al went out of business, Zenders bought the property. And they call it Rapunzel. On this end here was the Rapunzel shop, and on the far end was Cisnago with their Italian shop. Okay. Now, this house was approximately where the office building stands for the Carling Brewing Company, or for it's on that lot across the street from the brewery in the middle, and that's where this house stood. It's the closest we could figure out, although there was a hill there, but the hill was taken down for a parking space. This was a original Huberger house. And this is now the building which was the office for Carling and the other brewing companies that owned it. It was the entrance to it. It was a beautiful building. It's now owned by the Zender Incorporated. By the way, that original building that I just mentioned, the Box Tavern. Box built a tavern, built a brand new tavern right while the beer was coming back and things were moving, and he built a new bar, and after about 2-3 years they moved the bar across the street, and that became the office in that parking lot that used to be Box Tavern. This is Irma Schreiner's son, Ted Schreiner's house. He built it, and it's now the clock shop. I'm sure it is the clock house. And when I was a kid, there was a big barn standing over there, and we called it the Schaefer Barn. And next to the Schaefer Barn was a little tiny building which held the fire engine for the Canadians. It was a tiny little engine. I don't know if they ever got it started, but anyway, it was a tiny little engine wedged in between the barn and another house. But this is the clock house, which used to be the Schreiner residence. Okay. Now here we have the Kyle Hover wood carving shop
very talented man, the credit to the town. He has classes. He teaches wood carving. I would say at least 30, 40 people a month come there to take lessons in his carving, and they're from all over the United States. And next to that is next on the right-hand side of that carving is something I want to mention. Is the wood carver's pavilion. Now, a lot of people never looked at that twice, but it's worth your time to run back there. It's got a parking lot now in the back, and it has all the Grimm's fairy tales carved in wood into the inside of this little pavilion, and it's beautiful to see. You should see it. Okay. Now we're getting across. I'm bypassing the Hubinger, downtown Hubinger mill and all that, for the sake that I'm catching that when I do the other side. But Kearns is up in the corner on Jefferson and Main, and that building used to be the location for the Elmer Zender residence, and that was bought by Al Nicholas, and Al Nicholas made an apple house out of it. He had a client who wanted to sell apples, and he evidently was not just successful because after so and so many years he pulled out, and the Kern Sausage took over after that. Now, this is a very interesting house. First of all, it's a very typical Frankenmuth house, but it was owned by Augie Block, and while Augie Block's tavern was being built, the brick building, he used the front room of this house here as his bar. And it was very successful. Augie, no matter where he went, he had his clients, and they came to patronize him. And now it has now a flower shop. Nature's Designs it's called, and they sell flowers and decorations and things of that sort. And with that, I have to close off the first portion of the slides and go to the other side of the street.
My name is Dick Rummel. I'm 82 years old and lived in Frankenmuth all my lifetime. My grandfather John interest in the progress of Frankenmuth. Besides being a farmer and a carpenter, he served as justice of the peace and for many years was school inspector for the public school system. In 1883, he was elected to the state legislature, the only man in Frankenmuth ever to reach this distinction. In 1895, which was the 50th anniversary of Frankenmuth, he wrote a book on the history of Frankenmuth in the German language. This I have translated into the English language in 1990. With the approach of 1995, which is the 150th anniversary of Frankenmuth, I decided to make a slight record of all buildings in the city of Frankenmuth, old and new. The title of my presentation is Frankenmuth as I Remember It by Big Rummel. Frankenmuth as I Remember It by Dick Rummel. This is tray number 2, starting on the north of Main Street and photographing the east side. The first building is the Second National Bank building, which is located on the Lazo farm. I'm convinced it's the original Lazo farm where his forefather, his grandfather, settled first. This is Zender Chevrolet and Buick. It's owned by Marty Zender. It's under construction, and it has beautiful display and beautiful surroundings, beautiful area. This is a First America building in the mall area. This is the newly constructed IGA and Ben Franklin store owned by Bill Johnson and his boys, showing an excellent job of modernizing to conform to the Frankenmuth theme of Bavaria. This is a substation of the Michigan Bell Telephone Company. This is the Warden Interior building, which is new and has very nice design, and also has a very good interior. Quality Auto Parts. It's been there several years in the same location. This is a Bavarian Bowl, the only bowling alley I've ever had in Frankenmuth of that size, and it is owned by Cooper and an associate. This is a Jiffy Lube
which is new in town. This is our post office. This picture is several years old because the new shrubbery has taken over and it could not see it too well on account of the tall shrubbery, so I used the old picture. This is Heritage Federal on the corner of Main and Jefferson. Not Jefferson, Main and Genesee. This is the Muffler Man, also on Genesee and Genesee and Maine, and I remember it under various other businesses, like Dick Ruff and my young days had a vulcanizing station there, and the Rummel Link had run it as a vulcanizing station, and later on Carl Zeilinger bought it and built a gas station there. This is the St. Julian Winery, which used to be Weiss Implements, and even before Weiss Implements, it was known as the Reichley Blacksmith Shop. This is Kester Real Estate location on Main Street. This used to be the residence of Carl Fechter, if I remember right. This is the Piccadilly shop on Main Street. It used to be the Walter Google residence. This is the original Google, Paul Google residence, and the store was next door to it, and Paul had several sons and daughters, and they all helped in the store. This is the original Google store. It was unusually strange because when you came in the front door, everybody was lined up like soldiers inside. Walter would stand by a door that led into the shoe shop, and Mr. Trinkline would line up on the other side, which sold rubber shoes and stuff like that. Everybody had a station. And right in the middle of the store was this monstrous furnace. There was a big fire pot with a big round tin around it, and everybody seemed to just stand there and back up against it to warm up their hands. This is the corner of School and Main. And immediately to the left of this corner here was the Google Brothers store and residence, which later on was bought up by attorneys. But this corner here had a brick building, which was a a teacher's home. I think teacher Umbach and teacher Hahn and teacher Sontag all lived in that building. But when you look way in the back, to the left, is a school that housed the first 3 grades of our school system in the village here, in the parochial system. And the first 3 grades you went to that school, and the other 3 grades you went to the school across the street. And in front of that, to the right, is his residence, and that would be about where the entrance is now to the schoolhouse square, the front entrance. That would be about the entrance to that Meyer residence, and behind that, besides that school back there was also a tennis court. We had young boys in town evidently that liked tennis, and they built their own tennis court, and they kept it up themselves. These would be people like Herb Bernthal, for instance, and Ossie Bernthal, and Herb Barduzzi, and Frank Peach. These were the youngsters of the town at that time that were into sports, and they owned tennis courts, and they had canoes, and they really lived a good life. This is the List residence. They had a remarkable family. Lots of boys, and all of them inclined to be architects or designers, and even in money matters had financial luck. And now it became a linen shop and joined in with the schoolhouse square into the common parking lot. But it was also once upon a time owned or rented by the Frankenmuth School District as their headquarters, their office. Now this is sort of a sad building for me to look at, because Dr. Pillsbury practiced in there, and you notice the front steps are gone because Dr. Pillsbury had died in the meantime, and the building was just in disrepair. But on that window there where you see that was Dr. Pillsbury's office, and on the other side was Dr. Brender's office. And they worked together for many, many years till Pillsbury died, and then Brender put up his own building on Hubinger Street. This is Ed Dentz's barber shop. He was shown up in the last night's Frankenmuth News as being in business for 67 some odd years. And as a matter of fact, I've been going to him as a barber since I'm 15 years old. This is Books and Stuff. This was a different type building. It had a square front, and it was the Engel House, the Gus Engel House. And his brother were born and raised, and somebody remodeled it and made a business out of it. It's now called Books and Stuff. It used to be a veteran's office. Here's the original Frankenmuth State Bank. I copied that from a postcard. So you know it went back quite far in years because it was a hand-painted postcard. And that would really date it back to the early days. And it's now an antique shop. It was enlarged, and then for a time it was used by Wallace Brunner as one of his Christmas display shops, and then it was rented by Agnesrao, and Oscar had part of his furniture in there, and now it's an antique shop. Now here's an unusual picture. That's the Hubinger residence on Main and Tuscola Street. It's the Hattie Hubinger, what we call now Hattie Hubinger store. By that time it was Gottfried, or G.J. Hubinger, who operated the store, and you can see it had a meat market on the northwest corner, which later on became the bank headquarters for the Frankenmuth Bank, for the Frankenmuth German American Bank. They had headquarters in there later on. And I don't know if this store burned down or not, but this was in the turn of the century when G.J. Hubinger had this store. That would be Wallace Brunner's grandpa. And this is the way it is now, called Hattie's Corner. The store was rebuilt, and for all the years that I don't remember the old one, I can only remember this building here as being a Hubinger store. Now here we have another one of the historic signs. Cass River Brewery, which is later on called the Gerber Brewery in 1874, and we're not 100% certain who the first people were that made beer in Frankenmuth. It's this Heubich and Knaus that they had it, and Gerber had it, we know that, but there were other people who were in town who made beer earlier than these people here. Now this is the Frankenmuth Brewing Company, the Gerber Brewing Company. That's the way it stood next to Hattie's store. Still there. The building is burned down, but parts of it, I think, are still being used for the foundation, maybe, and stuff like that. And that is the picture after Gerbers remodeled it. This became the Gerber Brewery, and they were rather successful with their beer. Here we have a picture of the new design under Fred Shoemaker's management. The big windows were designed with the idea of showing the brew kettles to the visitors as they go by, which was quite something new. And later on it was bought, I think it is now owned by Randy Heine. He used to be a Frankenmuth boy in his young days, and I understand that he is part owner of the building or the owner. Now here you see a series of buildings. That first building there used to be Cedar drugstore, and the middle building was the Herb Bernthal jewelry store, and the third building was Herman Kern's cleaning establishment, and then came Dr. Schmidt dentistry. The buildings are still pretty much to be identified. However, they have had many changes in ownership. This is the original Stahl hotel. Mr. and Mrs. Stahl came from Germany and they built this hotel. I understand Mrs. Stahl once upon a time was interested in brewery, and Mr. Stahl and I built a house on Main Street across from their hotel, and Mr. Stahl got sick, and I understand that he went back to Germany. After Stahl had it, it was sold to George Schmidt, who was a dentist, and he fixed teeth and he raised his family in that building, and the lower level had 2 bowling alleys in it, and later on, after Schmidt had it, I think Emil Rummel bought it and rented it to the city while the city hall was being built, and then later on sold it to Morris, and I think Mr. and Mrs. Morris are the present owners. Here's a hard picture to identify, and there was the Herb Schluckbeer car agency and tract agency. But as you see, he was on the side of the hill. He didn't have anything to the right or to the left or to the back, so he stored everything out in front, including Main Street. And there he also had a gas station right on the sidewalk. And that was right next to Arno Mosner's house, or Louis Getzinger's house, which is the next house. And I didn't think this picture existed, but it showed up. Somebody showed it to me in the last year, and I found it because I was almost thinking it was impossible for anybody to have a picture of that enterprise. So first came Schluckbeer, and that building burned down. And then came the next house would be the Getzinger house, homestead, and then Getzinger's barn. See the roof on the barn. And that's where my house is now. My residence is where that barn used to be. And I think it might be a little bit further. You can maybe find the thenishtanin residence on the, no, it doesn't show. Anyway, those 3 buildings were there. Schluckbeer, Getzinger, and Rummel is there now. And this is the Neffy house, which is called the Großmutter house or something like that. And they have gifts and ice cream and stuff like that. It's very busy. You have a lot of rockers on the front porch, and people are there rocking. They used to be owned by Mr. Frank and one of the Frank daughters married Neffy, so Neffy lived there after that. And Mr. Frank owned what is now known as Schnitzelbank shop. They were woodworkers, and they had the Schnitzelbank shop. And that's the Schnitzelbank shop. Thereafter it was modified to some extent, but that was the original Schnitzelbank shop as Frank had it. And then it was bought by the Zender people and made, they still call it a Schnitzelbank shop, but it is a gift shop located on the same corner of the lot where the Frank building stood. In this house, never forgettable house, stood next to the Schnitzelbank shop, had a big lawn. There was a Fred Getzinger's residence. Originally, Mrs. Getzinger, I think she was a Schluckbeer, she had married a Hubinger, and Hubinger had the tannery out in back by the river, and he died. And then Mrs. Hubinger married Mr. Fred Getzinger, and then he made a slaughterhouse out of that tannery, and he was slaughtering by the river. And then came the next generation. Otto Hubinger's son thought he could try to be a store person, merchant, and he opened what's called the Hubinger supermarket, which was between the Getzinger house and the Stromer studio. It was they owned the whole lot there. And that is now the cheese house owned by the Zender Corporation. But originally it was known as the Hubinger Supermarket. Now that is a picture of the Stromer studio. You can tell it was built for a studio because it had a glass skylight in it, and a side skylight, which could only be used for photographically. And the building was built in probably in 1890 something, and I bought it in 1932. And most pictures, of course, in that time were made when there was high water, which meant there was 6 feet of water in your basement at this time. And then this building was sold, and the cheese house and the other building, which is John's Restaurant now, was built in its place. Most of John's steakhouse now was my old studio location. Here is the Rao Brothers house, which was as a harness shop and a bicycle repair shop. And Max Rao had 2 sons, Winnie and Sony, and I think he had a daughter. But you can see that there's water. Whenever the high water came, it was there. And that's the Rao building on the right side. That's Marshall Asher trying to bust up the ice downtown, and that is the Honol House in the background, and Man Honol sits in the boat out there. And across the street on the right-hand side would be the Getz Hotel. This is the original Kern Hotel. It faced due west on Main Street, and must have been before the turn of the century. Before they made repairs to it. But originally this was the Kern Hotel. And then they moved the house, that part of the building back, and put up a front of brick. You see the house is in back there someplace. And this is now brick. And it was occupied by the Frankenmuth News for some years. And then it was sold to the museum as the museum headquarters. And by this time, the museum had decided to move the Fisher Hall, which was a gift to them and the lot. They decided to move it up next to it and keep Fisher's Hall as a record of the old days up there. The days when the theater was still, and lots of people came to entertain, one-night stands and all kinds of things like that. But the Fisher Hotel stands now next to the Kern Hotel with a new addition put in between. This is a cheese factory that stood where the Chamber of Commerce now stands in downtown Frankenmuth. It was used for many things. Cheese, we had a lot of cheese houses, stations around, and in back there was living quarters for the cheesemaker and his family. But I remember it as Louis Ruprecht and his family living there, and I also remember the front part being used for storage for grapes while they were being processed for wine. That front section was used for that. This is one of my favorite pictures taken by my grandson, Willie. Building across the street from the Chamber of Commerce, from the village store, and I think it has a lot of value because of the people involved on the lawn, and the building, and the architecture, and especially the showing the lodge in the background. Here we have another one of these famous historic markers, the site of the Fisher Hotel. However, this sign is not in existence anymore for the simple reason that years ago Fisher's Hotel was very prominent, and since then Bavarian Inn has taken over, and it's not necessary to advertise Fisher's at this time. This is the original Union House Hotel, which right now is inside the Bavarian Inn. But it was really the start of tourism in Frankenmuth, because in that ad, which might be the next picture, oh yes, there it is. I took this picture from my grandfather's book of 1895, and I found out things written in German that are worthwhile translating. And for instance, it advertised air conditioning, which probably was not more than a transom above each door in the hotel. And then they advertised that in their dining room they have what they call eine Bühne, and a beanie. And I could not understand, never heard that word, so I looked it up in a German dictionary, and I found out it meant a stage. So you see, as far back as that, they were already entertaining people in the hotel, which to me was the start of the tourism business. Also, in the ad on the bottom, it says, we treat your horses like we treat the people. Now, to me, that is a big thing, because that you have to realize that they came by horse and buggy, stayed overnight, and went back the next day. They came from Flint or Saginaw, and the horses had to be treated equally. So that was a big thing for tourism. Here are 3 pictures of the Fisher Hotel as they were being built and enlarged, and signs put up front, and it showed in the distance, it showed water, they were underwater, and the building to the right became the restrooms, and to the left they put up a dining room, and little by little they updated till Bavarian Inn bought it from the Fishers. And then Tiny got himself an architect, and Ed Arnold worked at the Frankenmuth News at that time, gave him the idea that he should go Bavarian for the ethnic people in Frankenmuth, and that it would go over if you follow that theme. And this is the original drawing of the Bavarian Inn. Now you see here we had a covered bridge before the bridge we got now. This is 1854. We had a covered bridge, and then later on the iron bridge came, and then later on the Holtzbrücke came as it is now. But the marker tells it all. Now we're on the Hubinger property now, and the Hubingers were very proud of their achievement in America. As a matter of fact, they should be, because they were the pioneers. And this shows, in the middle now is the house where the first children were born to the original settlers. To the right, if you look real close, you see that covered bridge going across the water. See it? Behind that building. And the front building was a sawmill, and then they had a flour mill, and they had a guy come in and paint this picture from up the hill someplace. And the building in the way on top in the background is the brewery. That's where it was at that time. And it shows in the foreground the mill by the water. And there's that covered bridge again. You see it go over there. And it's a big turn. And the house. And then comes the planing mill back there. And that also was used for ice storage, and the harvested ice from the Cass River in the wintertime and put it in the storage with sawdust and delivered ice all summer long. And that building to the left with a horse in front of it was a store, that was their store building. The site of the wooden dam, it's unbelievable that they, at that time, could harness the river, even as small as the Cass River, but they evidently did. Here's a picture of the dam under construction, piece by piece. But you notice there's an iron bridge already in the background that had been put up since the wooden bridge. But it shows the dam being made of wood and timber. There we go. Historic Frankenmuth site of first sawmill. You see it's founded in 1848 by John G. and John M. Hubinger, who were two brothers who came from Germany to Frankenmuth after their parents had died in Germany. They were both millers at the Altmiose in Germany and decided to come to America. But at this time, they decided to separate and go their own ways, and John M. Went up the river to build another mill, which is now known as John G. stayed to the old mill and the dam and the sawmill. This is a picture showing logs as they came down Main Street, the main stream of the river in the spring of the year, and they had booms in where they caught them and guided them to the old mill on the Cass River, where they cut them up during the summer months. But there were other log booms that went by that had all log marks on it that came from various number of people in the Saginaw area, and they bypassed Frankenmuth, but they were all marked. Each log was marked with a special boom marker. This is the last picture taken of the original Hubinger grocery store. You will notice then the picture is taken from on top of the Frankenmuth Brewing Company, and it shows Zender's on the right side, and then there's a house next to it. I forgot the name of that man that, but Dr. Schmidt rented that house that he first came to Frankenmuth and had his dentist practice in there. And then to the left, it shows the back end of the Hubinger store, a brick store, which for many, many years served the public, and especially was it useful when the Rao brothers, Nicholson's Hardware burned down. This store was immediately put to use the following week by Rao brothers to continue their store operation. Now to the left of that wooden building, that used to be a cheese factory. And that cheese factory was converted into a gas station which belonged to Schwarzkopf, and that was run by Al Hetzner. And here is the picture of John L. and H. That's John L., that's the old man, and Arthur G. was his son. And they owned the lumber yard when they divided the different businesses. And Rocky Hubinger was the eventual heir to this estate before he left and went to California. And you'll notice on the right-hand side is that old cheese factory again, which is now a gas station on the right-hand side. This is that same gas station with a canopy on it. When you came off the bridge, you almost ran straight into that station because it came before the bend. As you notice, the road is coming towards you. That means that when you came off the bridge on the right-hand side, you had to make a left-hand turn, come in this direction, and then when you were about where it was taken, you made another right-hand turn to go up Main Street. But that curve was taken out with the advent of the new construction of the new road. And you see that little bridge there on the right-hand side. That is what was called the Euchre Station. Nobody knew why, but that was a little bridge, and it had a big culvert running underneath it, half the river run underneath it, and they gave it a nickname of the Euchre Station. This is a general view of the mill in regards to the brewery, the dam, and to the behind the mill is also you cannot see that. That's where the sawmill used to be. Where the dam, you see at this point, had been repaired. The brewery had been updated, and I don't see the old wooden iron bridge there anymore. So it was a fairly late picture after the bridge was taken down. Now this is an old time picture taken from on top of the Star of the West, shooting straight north on Main Street. You can see the Fisher Hotel on the right-hand side, and a building next to it, which was an old blacksmith shop, and Zender's you can see on the left side of the street, and one of the warehouses from the Hubingers had been moved over there across the street for storage, and right in front of it is a corn crib. Now here's a sort of a rare picture, because everybody says that the old mill burned down. Now they would say the flour mill burned down. And this is the one that did burn down. And as you notice, the picture, the building we got today is not the one that burned down. This one was then rebuilt to look like the one we have now, somewhat. But this is the original burned down, and the man on the right-hand side in front of the dog is Matthew Hubinger, or rather the guy on the right side of the dog is Matthew Hubinger, who was the owner at that time. Now this is quite a fascinating picture to me. It looks absolutely beautiful. When you look at it from this direction, it looks beautiful from the riverside. Very good job has been done, and it's called the Nicholas Hubinger Mill, and it's rightly so, because Al Nicholas's wife was a Hubinger who was born before, whose father had died before she was born. So she never got to know her father. And Nicholas was interested in the Hubingers because of that, and spent lots of time and money in reclaiming this old mill to look like the original. Not quite correct, but it's close enough. This is a picture from the Highland Park, looking across the street to the Zender gift shop, leather goods shop, I think they called this here. And to the left of that was gas station, which later on was converted into a leather store, I think. Now here's just another reason why some things do exist in Frankenmuth, like your Maibaum. And you will see a picture of it later. It was erected according to specifics from Germany, and Tiny was set on having a Maibaum in Frankenmuth. So consequently, the sign and the tree is later. The Maibaum, and actually it's beautiful. It's too bad that you can't get close enough to see the expression on the faces of these different people. They all represent something in Frankenmuth, either housefrau or a baker or whatever. They represent something, and there are pictures that show close-ups of these different characters. but I mean, in its original state, it was absolutely beautiful, and I don't think everything has ever been done to them since that tree is up there. Well, that's the Maibaum. Here's another picture that merely shows the backside of the mill where it joins the water, and it also has up on the left in the center a water wheel. I don't think it was running at that time, and there's the water wheel. And it's a beautiful an attraction for sightseers to come and stand on the bridge and take a picture of the mill by the water. Now here we go into the old original Frankenmuth Brewing Company. Frankenmuth always had a brewery. From its first incentive, they seemed to be needing beer for their livelihood. And they was built, and I think Mr. Bassnigger was maybe the brewmaster at that time. But this was the original, and from there on was added on and on until it got to be what it is now. This is the front they put on to conform a little bit more to the modern style. And to the left, that brick building was the brewmaster's house. That was moved cross lots, and it sits now on Jefferson Street next to Herb Bayerlein's house. That's the Stromer lives in that. And the building in front of you is the old Box Tavern, and it is known that it's the only place that sold beer the same way before, during, and after Prohibition. The only difference was they pulled the shade during Prohibition, and otherwise beer was always available in that building. And then he tore that down, built the brick building, and which was only there several years, and that brick building was moved across the street. Was to become the office for the brewing company. This is the Heilman Brewery when it was in full operation. Later years it fell into the hands of some people that didn't think it was worthwhile continuing brewing beer in Frankenmuth, and the thing went on the auction block and is now owned by Judy and Don Keller. This is the beer line residence, which was near Ruprecht's store. Mr. Beerland worked for at the Ruprecht store, and is now called the Toy Tree. This is an old picture. Don't know if it's 100% identified correctly, but we do think that there once upon a time was a Schaefer and Block blacksmith shop because the house on the right-hand side is the original Rummel house. And Mr. Rummel married a block and lived in that house. So we figure that the old man Schaefer owned this building here as a blacksmith shop. Now this is the corner store, roof rate store. It was quite famous. The evening boys got together and solved all the city's problems. The kids run in the back and stole half of the fruit and half of the cookies, of which I was one of them. And the store was such that it was very handy. Now this is our modern Conley gas station. I think that's the last time since it was repaired or changed. I think this is the last picture there is of it. Now I do like this picture here of the Zender original homestead. It looks very stately the way it was put up, and Don has his business in there, his printing business, and it looks it's an addition to Frankenmuth, and we call it the Zender residence.